I was looking through the comments of my video the other day, and basically in the video I said electric cars, well, most electric cars sound like sewing machines, and there was a lot of backlash to this. And I'm not gonna lie, I actually was lucky enough to go to Goodwood Festival of Speed a couple of years ago, and I actually got to see the VW IDR race car, which is an all-electric VW race car, go around Goodwood. And I'm not gonna lie, right, usually I'm not a massive fan of the way they sound, but this thing sounded insane. I mean, it sounded like a jet. It literally sounded like something from a video game or a film. And I mean, the VW IDR also broke the hill climb record at Goodwood, which is pretty nuts, but it was a very good sounding car for an electric car. But more and more car enthusiasts are actually surprisingly starting to like electric cars, which, if you ask me, is kind of weird, because a few years ago most car guys hated them. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I definitely was in this group of people. I used to absolutely hate most electric cars, but lately, I mean, especially the Hyundais, I'm not too sure why, but I'm really into a couple of their electric cars. I've sort of been converted over a little bit. I just want to make this completely transparent though. I am much more of a petrol head than I am into my electric cars. Like, I would choose a fully combustion engine car over an electric car any day of the week. But it's definitely caused this sort of awkward divide between car guys who are all for petrol or diesel or whatever, just combustion engine cars, and then car enthusiasts who are starting to sort of like electric cars. It's making a sort of weird divide, and I'm not too sure what to think about it. For me, I think the main issue with electric cars is the design. I do think a lot of them just look a bit ugly. Not all of them though. I'm not just hating on electric cars. I mean, like I said before, I quite like some of the Hyundais, and I mean, I genuinely have thought about buying a Honda E before, because I think this car looks pretty cool, and I kind of like Honda as a brand, but they always try and do something a bit different, and I just think this car, I don't know, it definitely has character to it. But the issue is most electric cars try and look futuristic, and they always have really ugly wheels on them. I don't know why, but it's just, when you look at these wheels, they're always, they just don't look nice. And electric cars just look a little bit awkward. I don't know what it is. There's just something not quite right about them. And for some reason, when a car manufacturer, especially car manufacturers that usually make fully combustion engine cars, when they ever make an electric car, they just add weird bits of green or blue or just different bright colours on random bits of the car. I don't know why they do this, but it just looks a bit weird. But, you know, apart from that, I mean, they are cheap to run, and also they are really fast. So I can see why a lot of car guys might be into electric cars, because obviously that 0 to 60 straight line speed, a lot of car enthusiasts really enjoy the feeling of that. Whereas, you know, I mean, I'm a bit more like the other side of the argument, where I prefer changing through gears and, you know, being in control of an engine. I guess some car enthusiasts just more enjoy the feel of a car. It's kind of old-fashioned, I know, but for me, it's way more rewarding driving a car where I have to work through the gears and try and get as most out of it as possible. It's why I love GT86s and I love MR2s, and it's why I own an MX-5, because I love rowing through the gears. And by the way, the gearbox on my MX-5 is very nice. And even with the 4-cylinder engine, I still prefer the sound of that to a lot of other cars. Now, I think this sort of leads on to the next argument, because a lot of the big divide between EV and combustion is, in my opinion, definitely the performance to the feel of a car. And it sounds kind of weird, but it's definitely almost like a speed versus handling kind of argument. And this argument has sort of been around since the history of all motorsport and just cars in general. For example, in the 60s, when you had the Mini Coopers racing the Mustangs, like, you had the Mustangs were really good on the straights and the Minis were really good on the corners, and it sort of created this weird, almost like contrast, where, you know, there would be really exciting races because you could see the complete opposites in the cars, but that's what made it so exciting, because they both would sort of counteract each other. Like, the Mustang would get away on the long straights, and then as soon as he got to the corners, the Mini would overtake, and then sort of vice versa. It's why we have cars like the Dodge Challenger and then cars like the GT86. Some people will be like, oh no, the GT86 is way too slow. But then others will be like, you know, the Dodge Challenger's, it doesn't handle well enough. And then you got cars like the Nissan GTR, which, I mean, let's face it, it pretty much does everything. Which is sort of why I guess we like cars like the GTR and supercars in general, because they can handle, and they do have that straight line speed. But at the same time, when you're on a bit of a tighter budget, you can sort of only choose between the two. There are a few exceptions, but like most of the time, you know, even things like the 350Z, then you got things like the MX-5. It just, you're choosing handling or you're choosing speed. Like I said, there are some exceptions. I'm not saying you can't. You know, cars like the S2K handle great and they're pretty quick. And then there's also cars in general like the M240i. Then again, there are a lot of newer cars like the M240i. You know, new cars can handle well and they have good performance. So maybe it's an argument that will eventually die. But for cheaper older cars, I mean it's why we love modifications so much, because you know if you've got a car like especially like an MX-5 or an MR2, you can put a turbo in it and you can make it a lot faster. And I mean this sort of brings me on to the next argument, and I think it mostly happens with younger car enthusiasts and older car enthusiasts, but it's always sort of been around. And of course I'm talking about the ongoing debate of modifying your car and keeping your car stock. And I mean this seems to be a common argument with older car enthusiasts and younger car enthusiasts, and I'm not too sure why. I mean my dad, he's probably watching this, and like a lot of older car enthusiasts, believe that, you know, most cars are pretty perfect from the factory, and that messing around with the car or modifying the car in any sort of way can sort of have a negative effect on it. And I mean, I'm not totally against keeping a car stock, because at the end of the day, it's first of all, it's a lot cheaper just not modifying your car or keeping it bone stock, and also it does retain the value of the car a lot more compared to if you were to put modifications on it. And I mean, another quick thing as well is like if you're doing performance mods, it's going to make the car a lot more unreliable, and also can just make the car a bit annoying sometimes. For example, if you put coilovers or lowering springs in your car, it's going to make the daily use of it and the general ride a lot harder. And I mean, I've put an exhaust on mine, and I can't lie, everyday driving can get a little bit annoying sometimes, especially when you're on the motorway and there's like a constant drone. But this is why things like valve exhausts and air suspension are so good, because you can moderate this. And I mean, let's face it, mods are really fun. When you first put an aftermarket exhaust in your car, it's a lot of fun to drive. you do feel like you're driving a race car, and then when you lower it as well, it just makes that. There's a lot of things that make the car more enjoyable if you do a few little mods here and there. And then if you add things like turbochargers or superchargers, that's a whole new level. But you know, it's good fun to do. I don't think you're ruining a car, because at the end of the day, it is your car, so you can do what you want with it. I always think as long as it's being used and enjoyed, not just sat out in the front rusting and rotting away, or being used for the wrong reasons. You know, if it's being used and you're modifying it and you're enjoying it, there's nothing wrong with that. But the whole built versus bought argument's kind of interesting anyway. I don't think I really sit on either side of the built versus bought or modded versus stock, because for a daily driver you're not going to want to do much to it at all, but for the weekend car you might want to do a few little modifications here and there. So I feel like I kind of sit in the middle of this one. But it'll definitely be interesting to know what sort of arguments you've heard. I think the electric car one's interesting because it's just so new. But if you did find some enjoyment in this video, please subscribe. It's free and you might as well. And I do car content all the time, so if you're into this sort of stuff, check out these other videos. And you know, you never know, you might enjoy these too. I will see you in the next one. Ciao for now.